Welcome to my channel, detailing events throughout the decades. 1989. Hillsborough Stadium disaster. Hillsborough Football Stadium was home to Sheffield Wednesday. It was selected by the Football Association as a neutral venue to host the FA Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. Kick-off was scheduled for 3 p.m. on April 15. Due to trouble with fighting and pitch invasions, most English football stadiums had high steel fencing between the spectators and the playing field. Risks associated with confining fans in pens was highlighted by the Committee of Inquiry into Crowd Safety at Sports Grounds, after the Bradford City Stadium fire in May 1985. It made recommendations on the safety of crowds penned within fences, including all exit gates being manned at all times, and capable of being opened from the inside by anyone in an emergency. Hillsborough had hosted 5 FA Cup semi-finals during the 1980s. A crush had occurred at the Leppings Lane end of the ground during the 1981 semi-final, after hundreds more spectators were permitted to enter the terrace than could safely be accommodated. This resulted in 38 injuries. It was recommended that the club reduce its capacity. The incident prompted the stadium to alter the layout at the Leppings Lane end, dividing the terrace into 3 separate pens to restrict sideways movement. This change invalidated the stadium's safety certificate, which was never renewed. The terrace was divided into 5 pens when the club was promoted to the First Division in 1984. In 1986, a crush barrier near the access tunnel was removed to improve the flow of fans entering and exiting the central enclosure. In the semi-final at Hillsborough in 1988, fans reported crushing at the Leppings Lane end. One supporter wrote to the Football Association and Minister for Sports, stating the whole area was packed solid to the point where it was impossible to move, and where I and others around me felt considerable concern for personal safety. Hillsborough was chosen as the FA Cup semi-finals venue in 1989. As is common at matches in England, opposing supporters were segregated. Nottingham Forest supporters were allocated the south stands on the east end, with a capacity of 29,800. While Liverpool supporters were allocated the north and east ends, which included Leppings Lane end, with a capacity of 24,256. This was reached by 23 turnstiles from a narrow concourse. Turnstiles 1 to 10 provided access to 9,700 seats in the north stand. 6 turnstiles numbered 11 to 16 provided access to 4,456 seats in the upper tier of the west stand. 7 turnstiles lettered A to G provided access to 10,000 standing places in the lower tier of the west stand. Liverpool had more supporters that day, but it was Nottingham Forest who were allocated the larger area. On match day, radio and television advised fans without tickets to not attend. Many supporters wanted to enjoy the day and were in no hurry to enter the stadium too early. Between 2:30 p.m. and 2:40 p.m., there was a build-up of supporters outside the turnstiles facing Leppings Lane, all eager to enter before the game kicked off at 3 p.m. Outside the stadium, a bottleneck developed, with more fans arriving than could be safely filtered through the turnstiles before 3 p.m. People with tickets at the wrong turnstiles and those fans who had been refused entry, were unable to leave because of the crowd gathering behind them. Fans outside the stadium could hear cheering as the teams came onto the pitch. A police constable radioed control requesting that the game be delayed, so fans could enter in time, but this request was denied. It's estimated that around 5,000 fans were trying to enter through the turnstiles, and this led to increased safety concerns. To avoid any injuries outside the stadium, Gate C was opened. 2 further gates, A and B, were also opened to relieve the pressure. Thousands of supporters entered the stadium. When the gates had been opened, thousands of fans had to enter a narrow tunnel leading to the rear of the terrace, and into 2 already overcrowded central pens, which created pressure at the front. Hundreds of fans were pressed against one another and onto the metal fences, as crowds continued to enter. Fans entering at the back were unaware of what was unfolding at the front of the pens. Fans were usually directed by stewards and police to side pens, but this time, for reasons not known, they were not. The match began as scheduled, while fans were still streaming into pens 3 and 4 from the rear entrance tunnel. What was happening went unnoticed by many, apart from those inside the pens. Bruce Grobbelaar, the Liverpool's goalkeeper, reported that fans behind him were pleading for help as the situation became much worse. At first, police attempted to stop fans from spilling out of the pens, believing that this was a pitch invasion. At around 3:05 p.m., excitement at a near goal resulted in a surge in pen 3, causing one of its metal crush barriers to give way. People were pushed forward on top of one another, and into the pen's front metal fence. Police Superintendent Greenwood realized the situation and ran onto the field to gain referee Ray Lewis's attention. The match was then stopped as fans climbed the fence in an attempt to escape the crush. A small gate in the fence had been forced open and some fans managed to escape through it. Others tried climbing over the fencing, while some fans were pulled to safety by fans in the west stand above Leppings Lane Terrace. The crowd in the Leppings Lane stand spilled onto the pitch, where many injured and traumatized fans congregated. Those still trapped inside the pens were packed in so tightly that many victims died of compressive asphyxia, while still standing. On the pitch, police, stewards, and members of the St. John's ambulance service were overwhelmed by the injured and dying. Those fans who were uninjured also assisted the injured. Several fans tore down advertising hoardings to use as stretchers. The agreed-upon protocol for the South Yorkshire Metropolitan Ambulance Service was that all ambulances were to queue at the entrance of the gymnasium. Any individuals within the stand that needed medical attention would be treated by police and paramedics. A total of 42 ambulances arrived at the stadium, 2 managed to make their way onto the pitch. People were taken to 3 hospitals for treatment. In total, 96 people died, with around 766 others injured. 2 sisters, 3 pairs of brothers and a father and son were all amongst the dead. John Paul Gilhooly was aged 10 and was the youngest person to die. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and Home Secretary Douglas Hurd visited Hillsborough the next day to meet those who had survived. Condolences flooded in from around the world, including U.S. President George H.W. Bush. Anfield Stadium was opened the next day to allow fans to pay their respects to the dead. Thousands of fans visited and the stadium was filled with flowers, scarves, and other tributes. A disaster appeal fund was set up, and within days, donations had passed £1 million. Much of the money went to victims and relatives of those involved in the disaster. In May 1989, a charity version of the song, Ferry Across the Mersey, was released in aid of all those who were affected that day. The first coroner's inquest into the disaster was completed in 1991. The deaths were ruled as accidental. Families of those victims rejected the coroner's findings, and their fight to have the matter reopened began. Lord Justice Taylor was appointed to conduct an inquiry into the events that day. This became known as the Taylor Report. It was concluded that policing on the day had broken down, and the main reason for the disaster was the failure of police to control the situation. The stadium was also criticized for the inadequate number of turnstiles at the Leppings Lane end of the stadium, and the poor quality of the crush barriers on the terraces. It was suggested that this failure also contributed to the disaster. It found that there was no provision for controlling the entry of spectators into the turnstile area. The failure by the police to give the order to direct fans to empty areas of the stadium was described by Taylor as a blunder of the first magnitude. Police were quick to blame the fans for the disaster. They claimed fans were drunk and late, and many were trying to gain entry without tickets or using forged tickets. Police refused to accept any responsibility into what had happened. The victims' families continued to fight for the truth in the matter, and to find out what had really happened on that day, and why so many people died. In 1997, Home Secretary Jack Straw ordered an investigation into the events that day to begin. However, in the report in February 1998, it was concluded that there was insufficient evidence for a new inquiry to take place. In 2009, a Hillsborough independent panel was formed to review all the evidence into what had happened. In 2012, it revealed new evidence about the extent of police efforts to shift blame onto the fans. On September 12, 2012, the Hillsborough Independent Panel concluded that no Liverpool fans were responsible in any way for the disaster, and its main cause was a lack of police control. Crowd safety was compromised at every level and overcrowding issues had already been reported 2 years before the disaster. After the findings, the Hillsborough Families Support Group called for new inquests for the victims. They also called for prosecutions for unlawful killing, corporate manslaughter, and preventing the course of justice in respect of the actions of the police both in causing the disaster and covering up their actions afterwards. Calls were made for the resignation of those police officers involved in the cover-up, and for the police and the Football Association to admit their blame. The second coroner's inquest was held from April 1 to April 26, 2016. They ruled that the supporters were unlawfully killed to grossly negligent failures by police and ambulance services. The inquest also found the design of the stadium contributed to the crush and that supporters were not to blame for the dangerous conditions. On June 28, 2017, it was announced that 6 people were to be charged with offences in relation to the disaster. Former Chief Superintendent David Duck Enfield, who was in charge that day, faced manslaughter charges by gross negligence. Solicitor Peter Metcalf, former Chief Superintendent Donald Denton and former Detective Chief Inspector Alan Foster were all charged with perverting the course of justice. On June 29, 2018, a ruling was made that David Duck Enfield would be prosecuted on the manslaughter charges. On September 10, 2018, at a trial preparation hearing at Preston Crown Court, David Duck Enfield pleaded not guilty to all charges against him. The trial started on January 14, 2019, and is expected to last around 4 months. Those families of the victims continue to fight for justice into the disaster. Several memorials have been erected in memory of the victims of Hillsborough. We remember those families who lost their loved ones that day, and the continued fight they have had to endure to seek justice for the disaster. May you never give up the fight, and hope that justice is served. Forever remembering those who died that day. May you never be forgotten. Thank you for watching and learning about events throughout history. Please subscribe to my channel to view other tragic events that happened throughout the decades.